Hello. So this week I think we might be finishing volume 2 after all. So before we start, let's set our motivation. During the session, but also in our lives in general, we have many opportunities to develop ourselves, to become better people, learning from our mistakes and helping to be a positive influence on the world. And as Buddhists, we recognize the opportunity that we can become a Buddha. And as a Buddha, we'd be able to spontaneously and effortlessly benefit all beings without exception. And so, seeing that value, we can dedicate ourselves to work to meet the needs of all beings spontaneously and effortlessly with great energy. So the purpose of this primarily is exactly that, to help us, to inform us, and to help us on our path to enlightenment so that we can benefit all beings. So last session we talked about, in very brief, serenity or concentration, developing our concentration mind, and also wisdom. And we've got a little bit more wisdom to do, and then a short chapter on engaging with all beings. So we'll talk about that. So where we left off was primarily in this particular section. Rinpoche has been mainly concentrating on understanding the importance of study and the importance for us to develop a love of learning as a part of our practice. And he's continuing in this thread right now. And he says there's two types of teaching in Dharma or Buddhist teaching. That which is scripture, that's been, in other words, the instructions or the guidelines that have been spoken by teachers and have been written down, and that which is actually put into practice. And he says the first is what gives us the guidelines by how to practice. So that what we're looking for when it comes to Dharma, and this is really the most important thing, I believe, is to understand what we're saying here specifically is what gives us, what informs us. So what it is that we read which can inform us, can actually, and when I say inform us, what I mean here is change the way we respond in the world. So the way in which we act and the way in which we respond to events in the world is what informs us. So when we see something, we understand something, when we realize it, it changes the way in which we respond to situations. So that's how it informs us. If we were studying karma, for instance, and we just understood it as some sort of Indian metaphor that's similar to the judgment of God and is built into this, and belongs to medieval, whatever, then in that sense we have an academic understanding of some of the aspects in which we might want to interpret society in a particular way. But it doesn't inform us. It doesn't make us think. Actually, what it's trying to say to us is that every single time we interact with our environment, there are consequences. So this is the point about karma. And it's the understanding when we're reading our scripture, we're reading our texts, we're listening to teachings, what we're looking for is that which informs us, which actually makes us think, oh, I need to really understand and realize this, okay? So in many ways, a lot of these things that we've been learning, like the fact of death, the fact of consequences of actions, all of these things seem very trivial. They're easy to understand. They're not complicated. They don't require vast amounts of belief system to accept. And because of that, we can sometimes discount them. But the point about this is that they have a meaning. They have a strong meaning in terms of our practice. When we understand death, then and we begin to start thinking about and becoming mindful of death, then we begin to lose some of the clinging to life nature that we might have, because we begin to recognize the reality of our mortality. It can be quite a grieving process. It's not easy, but these things help us to reassess and to refactor the way in which we approach our lives. They inform us. So, and then Rinpoche says, so this is the guidance, and then the latter, the practice, is assimilating this, right? Bringing it in, making it real, making it a part of our lives. So these two things primarily require us to, in order to practice, we need to understand what the advice is. If we don't know what the advice is, we can't practice. So in that sense, what we're looking to do, and the reason why study is so important to us, especially within Dharma practice, is it gives us something to work with, to cogitate, to consider. So in many ways, what we're trying to do is to develop a good understanding of all the things that we need to know in a way which then allows for us to interpret, to develop a point of view, to examine, to turn over, to re-examine, not just to accept it because Buddha said it. In fact, Buddha says several times, you need to work this out for yourself. So the point is this is to help us develop a stronger understanding. And in many ways, if we're able to understand that it's simple and straightforward, what reason is there for us not to take it on or to adopt it? So he says the best way in which to practice without error is by understanding the importance of study. And the best way to study is to understand it within the context of practice. So he said, in this sense, it's important for us not to forget what we're studying when we're practicing, and likewise, not to forget how we practice or what we've learned from our practice, engaging in it in our study. In this way, we can begin to assess and to examine and to refine and to understand and make it ours in the sense not like it's mine, but to accommodate it so that our lives are fulfilled or filled with the Dharma practice in this way. And he says again and again, he says, don't separate, don't make Dharma and practice separate. It's not as if they're separate, the study and practice, sorry. Study and practice are two aspects of the same thing. What we're wanting to do is to use them together. It's just the same in any other tradition or any other system when we're developing ourselves and developing skills. The idea of being able to be, let's say, a physicist in a laboratory doing these tests, with these incredible lasers and all these amazing equipment, if we don't understand, if we don't have the theory, if we don't have a blackboard somewhere or a whiteboard somewhere to write our ideas down, then we've just got a huge room filled with expensive equipment. So, it's more likely we're just going to make a mess rather than anything else. And certainly we're not going to discover anything. So this idea of study and practice is not particularly strange or unusual or to be to be surprised by. And he says, and again he says, when we're starting off, what we need to think about is as bodhisattvas, when we're sincere in our practice, we need to have a grounding that we are content with. So it might be quite straightforward. It might be very simple. We might even just have one major idea, one sort of definite, strong idea, for instance, like loving kindness, compassion. And this is our guiding light that helps us. But as we develop that, we begin to recognize how these things all fold in together. So likewise, as I said before, in terms of the six perfections, when we're looking at the six perfections, what we see, one way of looking at this, there are many different ways of looking at this, but one way of looking at this is that each of these perfections come naturally from the twofold aspect of the mind for Buddhahood, bodhicitta. One of them is this idea of pure altruistic intent, the wish to take on the burden of responsibility for all beings without exception, out of a sheer sense of cherishing and loving. And then the other one is, of course, this insight into the nature of reality and seeing how this nature is obscured by our by the aspects of our mind, is ignorance that likes to hold on to such coarse concepts as permanence and self and sort of me. These ideas here prevent us from being able to see clearly, and therefore we cling on to or feel furious about, and this causes all the suffering for us. So we're doing more about that later on. So he says, as we develop, then we'll be able to see more clearly, and more things will fold in, and we begin to see how all of the teachings work as advice. Not just Lamrim. Lamrim is sort of well known for being talked as practical advice, but in terms of where it's taking its lead from is from the sutras, from the same text that every other tradition uses. So this way, it gives us to understand how Buddha teaches, and the way in which he teaches is against specific audiences and specific contexts, but the key message is going to be the same. So he says, once we've developed that, once we've begun to understand how everything fits together, then whenever we read any text, any text that's to do with the path, to do with the understanding of the path, there's this sense of delight that arises. And in fact, in many ways, it becomes more clear for us to recognize when something is Dharma and when something has been only attributed to be Dharma, because we can see clearly whether or not it's spot on the money, whether or not it's key in terms of the expression that Buddha would give in terms of the path, the Bodhisattva path, or the Theravada path. So he says, therefore, we should rely upon teachers. We should find teachers that we can connect with. We should rely upon teachers that we can trust, and also on fellow sincere practitioners. Make a strong foundation in our ethical discipline, and commit ourselves to that. Again and again, trying to meditate, to learn how to accommodate, to accept, and develop our skills, develop our loving kindness, and so on. And this way we can strive and become better at it. So it says in brief, then, there are three divisions to wisdom. Yeah. So there's wisdom that knows the ultimate and knows the final nature of reality, and it's this wisdom specifically which is that which liberates us, which frees us from samsara. Then there's wisdom that knows the conventional, and in this case he's talking about the 5 topics of knowledge that I mentioned earlier on, to do with language and maths and so on. And then also wisdom that knows how to act for the welfare of living beings. And this again is how to meet, and it's a wisdom of the world, if you like. It's knowing how to meet and address and to work with different people. So one way of looking at this is, in a sense, there are also these words, in translation can sometimes get a bit lost. In English, we have different words for these different types of wisdom in one sense. So one of the aspects of this is there's intelligence. Intelligence is very, very good for our study, for developing our skills, but also not just a mental intelligence, but also a physical intelligence, an ability a skill. So we can be intelligent in dance, or we can be intelligent in theatre, not just in terms of understanding it, but being able to bring our body or bring our being into it. And likewise, we might be very intelligent with words, and this will help us with poetry or composition and so on. So these sorts of things are not just about some IQ test. Intelligence here is the bigger picture, but it primarily is about our ability to see clearly, to see fast, to understand a complex aspect, and also to understand quite deeply this particular topic that we might be studying. So this sort of intelligence is the conventional wisdom. Wisdom that is to do with, and this is sort of like intelligence is a good word for this. Now, wisdom often is knowing, not knowing lots of things or knowing it quickly, but knowing how to explain it to others, how to be able to share with others, how to meet, how to act within a conversation, how to be aware of how people work and work with them. So this is very much like the ability for us to develop how to meet the needs of others. And this is like the third wisdom. The third definition in this sense is often the word wisdom is what's meant in English rather than a lot of knowledge. Yeah. So this idea of knowledge and intelligence, and if you like, and wisdom are often separated in English. In Tibetan and so on, they're not so separated, so they're classified under the same name. Thirdly, the wisdom that's insight, direct insight into emptiness or selflessness. This is an experiential wisdom based upon understanding and meditating and considering and reflecting upon. In other words, to do with self-change, self-recognition, and it depends very much upon the ability to let go, to free ourselves of our convictions, to completely let go of our sense of our universe, the universe that we've built up biologically and also from innately, and also from our conditioning, our cultural conditioning, and be able to actually free ourselves from these bounds. So being able to do that involves a sort of a creative, experiential type of insight, rather than it being intellectual or it being sort of just a clever. It's actually a way of being able to see the world with fresh eyes, continually with fresh eyes, being able to sort of be revolutionary in what's thought. So again, he says all three of these wisdoms are involved in the perfection of wisdom, not just one or the other. Normally, the primary emphasis is placed on emptiness, on this experiential wisdom, because this is the one that liberates us. So when we're talking about the two bodhicittas, it's this particular type of wisdom that we're really talking about, this insight into the nature of reality. This is the if you like, one of the wings of the dove of a bodhisattva, right? The other one is loving kindness and compassion. So these two are the wings, right? So in that sense, we have this idea of this is a specific type of wisdom, but in terms of perfection of wisdom, we need to be able to work with people, we need to be able to learn, we need to develop skills. So it's all three types in this sense. And he said again, always and as ever, tying it in, we need to ensure that these work with our bodhicitta and use them to check our bodhicitta. And likewise, each of the six perfections should be found to be woven together in our practice this way. Yeah, always with the purpose, the same motivation as ever. Nothing's changed in that sense. Our insight and our loving kindness and compassion, this is our bedrock for our practice. The very, very bedrock, the wings that take us there. They are the journey. Everything else is for us to test, to check, to ensure, to strengthen, to develop, not separately, a part of, integrated in that way. So he says, in summary, we have this idea of saying that even if we have a direct insight into emptiness, if we've managed to have the liberating mind, this experiential understanding of reality, which is, he says, even then, that doesn't make us a bodhisattva. And having that mind doesn't make it, is not necessarily a bodhisattva deed, because this insight is shared with Sravakas and Prachekas. So there's other types of practitioner. But what makes it a bodhisattva deed is the altruistic mind, this compassion, this loving kindness, this willingness to, this dedication to shoulder the responsibility of all beings. And then that gives us the spirit of enlightenment, and then our actions become those actions of a bodhisattva. And he says, then once we've got this, then we should be aspiring to develop our wisdom in all our actions. We should always be looking to improve our skills. We shouldn't be shy away from it. We should be thinking, I can do more. And in fact, there's a quote I missed, which is from Sharawa here. He says, until you become a Buddha, until you are a Buddha, your studies are not finished. They're finished when you're a Buddha. So for us to think, oh, I've learned enough, I don't need any more, it's just a mistake. But also recognizing, again, knowing our limits, knowing how much we can learn, how much we can adopt, because there's no point in us just studying if we're not able to practice it. Yeah. So when we're practicing and we're studying, actually what we're wanting to do is to say, do I understand what I should be doing here? If I don't, maybe I study. If I'm studying something and I don't know how to practice it, maybe I need to do more practice. So this helps us to understand a bit more about how to bring this practice, how to bring Dharma alive for us. But then Rinpoche says, now he wrote this in the 14th century, so he has this, but he still feels at the time, it's like, Dharma is in decline, things are getting worse. And it's like, well, okay, you should look now, things are different altogether now, right? So, but he says, that generally, when it comes to the practice of the 6 perfections, when you look at all the different teachers that there are, and in terms of all the different many types of teaching there are, he says there's a lack of emphasis on the 6 perfections altogether, the bodhisattva practice. He says maybe there's a little bit on meditation, on developing this calm mind. There's a little bit of that. Sometimes there's a little bit of insight, a little bit of sort of like know your mind, this sort of thing. He says, but all the rest of them has pretty much disappeared. So he says it's important for us to understand how these actually work to substantiate our practice. They're not separate from these practices. We need these practices really in order to enhance our stabilization, also to enhance our understanding of emptiness, our insight, to enhance our compassion and so on. So these sorts of things all work together. They're not separate again. So he's saying we've got to be able to use this. And he says there is no Buddha who's managed to achieve enlightenment, full enlightenment, without practicing each of all of the 6 perfections. That's what makes them a group. They are what we need to do. We need to have these in order to be able to happily in order to enable us to tread the path to Buddhahood. So that is the conclusion of the 6 perfections. And now Rinpoche is a very short chapter here, and also on how to help others. So one of the aspects of this, and in fact, I think Rinpoche mentions it in a bit, but I want to start off with it, is the idea of saying the 6 perfections is how we, having accepted the responsibility for all sentient beings, how we've decided. Once we've decided to tread the bodhisattva path, the path of a being who's working towards pure highest level of Buddhahood, then for ourselves, for our practice, for our development, we depend upon the 6 perfections. Yeah. Based on the bodhicittas, the 2 bodhicittas, we practice the 6 perfections. But it's not just the 6 perfections we have to practice, because this is how we develop internally. This is our own working with our intolerance, working with our ethical discipline, working with calming our mind. All of these things are basically to do with developing ourselves on our side. Patience practice isn't just about others. It's often about others, but it's also about how we respond to others. So even if we look at patience and generosity in terms of the six perfections, the aspect is how we develop it on our side, how we respond to it on our side. So the other point of this, and this is really very important for the Bodhisattva, is how to engage with others, how we meet the needs of others. After all, this is what we're working towards. So we can't all be doctors. We can't. Well, none of us are yet Buddhas, or if you are, then you can come, please teach. So this thing is saying primarily, what we need to do is to work on developing our skills of working with others, right? So this is known. The way in which this translator is done is, it says it's the 4 ways to gather disciples, which makes it sound like we're sort of dressing ourselves up as gurus, and that's not the point. The point primarily is how to bring Dharma into the world. So Dharma, remember, is only this idea is not us to convert others to Buddhism. Okay, that's not what we're doing here at all. And we're not here to gather, oh, I want to have more disciples, right? None of that's correct. So one of the problems about language is we find ourselves with these translation hurdles, and one of them is very strong here. We're not trying to gather, this idea of I need to have lots of disciples to be strong, to be, a high Lama. This is not appropriate. And secondly is to understand, I'm not here to evangelize. I'm not going to go around saying, oh, you've got to be a Buddhist, right? That's not part of what we're doing here at all. We recognize that people have the need to choose and develop their path according to their own particular needs. So for us to say, oh, you need to be Buddhist is a mistake. In fact, it's disempowering. So everything we're doing in our practice is to empower, not to disempower, to give the option, to give the freedom to consider, not to take the freedom away. And the first of these four ways, sorry, I'm now jumping ahead. So that basically he's going to break this down into 5 sections, right? So the first is what they are, what these four practices are, why there are 4 of them, and what the functions are, how they work, why we should engage in them, right? So first of the 4 is actually the same in word, in terms of the word, as the 6 perfections is generosity. So in some ways, the aspect of generosity is similar to the 6 perfections in terms of being generous. But and again, when we talked about it within generosity, the perfection of generosity, we talked about actually generosity itself is the realization, the manifestation, or the materialization, if you like, of love. So when we give meals, when we give food, there's a huge amount of love involved in this process. So being able to give shows, look, I've got something I can give to you. So this is very good. And again, one of the aspects of this in terms of engaging with others is actually to give them an ear, not to talk, but to listen. So it's actually very, very important for us to be able to listen, to hear what others are saying. Being able to listen is a huge gift. Being able to actually listen is a huge opportunity for our practice, because it's where we can base our empathy, where we can begin to understand our kindness, our loving kindness, and our compassion. It's also absolutely necessary for us to learn how to listen in order to know how best to respond to the individual. When we're enlightened, maybe we can see their minds and we can understand everything from their point of view. But until then, we are only going to really be able to depend upon what we're told or what we can see. And in those senses, sometimes it's easier, even if we think we can see something, it's quite useful to get some sort of feedback, some sort of being told, rather than just making an assumption. So when we're wanting to work with and help others, then learning to listen and learning to be able to give what's required from that listening is a really strong, a really powerful strength. Being generous naturally helps, right? Being able to be free and to be giving and to think always, what can I give? How can I help? This sort of attitude, even if it's just like, taking somebody's heavy bags when they've been on a journey or whatever it happens to be, not taking them away from them, but helping them up the stairs or whatever it happens to be. All right. Helping over the road. Sort of Boy Scout stuff is not just Boy Scout stuff. It's also really about trying to say, how can I contribute right now? What can I do, even in a small way, that makes a difference? So this is generosity. The second is pleasant speech. So here, Rinpoche just says pleasant speech, but in fact there's a lot more to that. And in a sense, the idea is to be able to express Dharma, the truth, those aspects of the world which can inspire us to be, or inform us to be better practitioners. Okay, again, going back to this simple message. If we think about what informs us, what helps us develop, then if it helps us, then it's likely, and this is what Buddha teaches us, some of these these views we can help to inform others, or they can accommodate them, and they can think, oh, that actually helps me a lot, right? So then this helps. But to do it in terms of a way which is meeting their particular views is absolutely irrelevant. If they don't have a viewpoint which can accommodate that, there's no point us telling it. Yeah. So pleasant speech depends upon and rests upon our generosity of being able to hear, being able to meet them on their level or as much as we can, so that at least they felt met on their level, right? So it's not as if we're playing a game. We're honestly trying to see how best we can meet or accommodate their needs within their own language, within their own context. Now, we're always going to make mistakes, but we can do our very, very best to say, actually, my views are not important. Okay, my practice isn't important. What I'm doing that for me. I don't need to share that with everybody. I don't need to go around saying, I'm Buddhist. Yes, I'm a Mahayana Buddhist. I'm Bodhisattva. I mean, it's just silly, right? It's just really silly. Oh, yes, I've taken a vow to benefit all beings. Just makes you look like a fool, or makes me look like a fool in this case. So I think the point is to say, not, oh, look how great I am. At all, it's to say, how can I meet you? What are your needs? What do you want? Not just to ask. If you just ask, you say, do you need anything? It sounds very, very patronizing, right? So if I say, a lot of these things are like language, right? Like if somebody says, you see somebody's busy or working, and you say, do you need a hand? They were like, oh, so what you think, I want to be dependent upon you, that I need your hand. So it might seem like a small thing, but actually it's far better if we can say something like, can I help? Right? Or what can I do to help? Or sometimes it's quite obvious that potatoes need peeling or carrots need washing or whatever. So why ask? Just do it, right? So these sorts of things are like thinking about the specific context and being able to meet those particular needs without having to draw attention to ourselves, right? We're not important in this. What's important is to be able to help others. So if we're doing it in order to be able to get attention or to draw attention, then our motive's not right. Our motive of bodhicitta is not correct. It's self-centered. Yeah. So that's very important for us. So this is again finding ways of being able to meet not just in terms of pleasant speech, but pleasant action, also in terms of being able to use opportunities in conversation, opportunities in our actions to as Dharma opportunities, not to teach, not to preach, right, but to share possibly alternatives or to help with self-destructive, to help people out of these self-destructive views or loops. But in order to do that, we have to understand it. We can't otherwise, it's best for us just to keep quiet. Yeah. So sometimes it's like far better for us to be humble, so I really don't understand, it sounds terrible or whatever, not to just try and help when we don't really know what we're talking about. So far better for us to be to have this humble, recognize, do our best, and like that. That's far better. But sometimes we need to say something, sometimes we can say something, and then it's very, very useful for us not to feel too shy and say, okay, you know, maybe the idea of for instance, trying to reconcile some of these, rather than somebody's very upset with somebody, maybe trying to give them a path which allows for them to let go of the judgment, frees them from this malice or this intention to punish, or this sense of joy when they see their enemies suffering. So all of these sorts of things, to try to find a way very, very gently, yeah, to actually possibly just guide a little in a way where they're not going to feel alienated by it, right? So we need to work with, we're always working with, we always need to think about how to do that best. So then again, consistency, working at aims. So this is primarily, again, pleasant speech, but also working at aims. And this means in order to work on thinking about how can I encourage somebody to work within their practice, to develop a sense of practice. So not just because you know, there's no point me sort of talking to a Christian sort of saying, well, Shantideva says such and such, or Je Rinpoche says such and such, because they don't know Shantideva, and it sounds to them like some sort of foreign, you know, Indian guy, right? And again, also, they might feel that because some religions are very evangelic, they may feel that I'm being evangelic, and of course I'm not. That's not the point. The point is to encourage in the practice that they're developing. So it might be that there are aspects which we might struggle with, such as sacrificing animals, right? Killing animals on certain holy days is something that Buddhists, even Buddha has said, no, we don't do that, and it's not good to do that. So we wouldn't encourage that practice, but we would certainly encourage the idea of seeing all men as our brother, right? Or all humans as our brothers and sisters, to be more clear, right? It's not just about men. So this idea of being able to recognize within other religions, understanding a little bit about other religions, to be able to express to a Muslim or to a Jew or to a Christian or to a Hindu or to a Sikh or to a Taoist or to a Shinto or to another Buddhist from a different tradition, these paths and aspects of the paths which we can see would be inspiring or could be inspiring, and to encourage practice and to remember ethics and the importance of ethics, or even with atheists or scientists, to remember the importance of study that we've been talking about, possibly offering different ways of thinking about things, can be really, really beneficial. Yeah. So this sort of thing of actually encouraging practice within the scope of the practitioner is really, really important. It's exactly what Buddha did, right? He gave different talks to different people, different advice to different people. And he did that because he was aware of their specific needs, their specific viewpoints, and was meeting their needs and their viewpoints as much as they could. Always encouraging, try to be good, try to be kind, try to think about with the sort of people you'd like to be around with, set an example, be responsible. These sort of really, really good ideas that are simple, straightforward, non-complex, non-contentious, not sort of based upon any belief system. What's wrong with it, right? What's wrong with it? So that sort of aspect is very important. And lastly, the fourth one is consistency of behavior. So this is where we should consider saying, if we practice what you preach, if you like, but also there's the point of remembering that we are setting ourselves up. We're working to be examples to others, and we must always be aware of the fact that whatever we do, whether or not somebody sees it immediately, what we do is going to have a ripple effect. So when we have an opportunity to do something that is actually, we're able to do something that meets the Dharma, meets the approach to the Dharma, then this is very, very powerful, very, very powerful indeed. when we are trying to practice and we make mistakes, this weakens the Dharma practice altogether, weakens our practice, it also weakens the sort of the idea of Dharma altogether, the idea of practice altogether. It has a very, very strong damaging effect. So yeah, we will make mistakes. We do make mistakes. We will still make terrible mistakes. And therefore, what do we do when we make those terrible mistakes? And exactly that is to think about saying, well, at least we can do our best to sort of remember the four aspects of repairing bad karma, which is, it doesn't actually fix it, but it can help to mitigate the effects. So we confess, we are honest about it, we feel and show remorse for it, we develop a strong conviction to work to repair any damage done, and we remain committed not to repeat. Okay, so these four things are very, very important ground rules for us. And if we have made a mistake, or we do make a mistake, then to be able to show how to respond to that mistake itself becomes useful, becomes Dharma. So it's not like we should go out making mistakes, but as this is inevitable, it's also very, very good for us to use this as an opportunity to show how best to respond to mistakes as well. So most of the time, we need to be honest. We need to be able to try to meet the Dharma as well as we can as a practitioners, right? This is how we set an example, how we inspire Dharma practice more than anything else, absolutely more than anything else. People seeing somebody who's actually grown from, developed, or become calmer or more able to deal with situations, more responsible. All of these key things is what distinguishes a practitioner from a non-practitioner in this sense. So when we fail, well, fair enough, but we then again is to do what we can to repair that damage. Not because of karma in the future, but because it's good, again, to model how best to deal with these things. It doesn't mean, again, as I said again, it's not about bringing attention to ourselves. But also on this issue, we have to be very careful not to model fake model. So if we have a public side and a private side, and our private side is really tragic and terrible, and our public side is all good and virtuous, we're lying. It's a deceitful practice, and it's hollow. It has no strength or power to it. It's not meaningful. Yeah, it doesn't work. We've got to be honest. We have to be who we are. Now, that doesn't mean that, for instance, let's say that doesn't mean that we should accept that we're completely useless and so swear in front of children or do anything like this, because we know better than that, right? We do the very, very best we can in each moment. And sometimes it's true. It's much easier to be a better person when we know that we're being observed than when we're not being observed. So that's fine. That's okay. That's not lying about ourselves. That's looking at the current context. But when we are actually denying, or we're hiding, or we're pretending that we're always this way and we're not always this way, then that's a lie. That's a deception. Yeah. So this point I'm trying to say is, yes, it's okay for us to be different when we're on our own to when we're being observed. Of course, we change in these situations. That's not a lie. That's social responsibility. So, but also to think about saying, for us to deny or say, oh yes, I'm always perfect. I've got perfect. I meditate 16 hours a day, and it's like, yeah, when I'm watching TV, then that's sort of like, not being as honest as one could be in that sense. So we do need to try our best to be sincere and honest in our approach to things. That does not mean letting go of our discipline. Quite the opposite. We need to maintain and develop and strengthen our self-discipline, and we need to be honest in this. Well, I did a lot of talking. So why are there four of them? And he says, first of all, in order for us to have an effect, to have a strong effect on others, being generous, both materially but also through things like listening and so on, will help to will help generate a sense of relationship, right? Establish rapport. So one of the aspects of, as I said, about generosity is it's about kindness, about loving kindness, giving. And when we give, when we are giving, when we're being generous with our heart, then what we're doing is we're saying, I love you. And when we say, I love you, then what we're doing is we're allowing somebody to say, oh, this person I can trust, they love me. And therefore they develop a lack of, there's less chance for a fear to develop. If this is open, honest, loving kindness, and no agenda to it, right? There's no secret hidden agenda. This is why gathering disciples is such a terrible translation. Just purely out of love, loving kindness. So then when we're looking at this, then it's like saying there's this sense of rapport. There's like, okay, I can meet this person. And so there's a connection made. When we make a connection, then this helps for a communication, helps us to share. Okay? So then once that rapport's been made, then there's the availability to be inspired by or to be informed by the idea of considering how best to practice, how best to there's a tendency there's the opportunity to enter into discourse, into dialogue, and then that allows for us to use that respect to help support, help empower them in terms of their practice, not in terms of our practice, in terms of their practice, understanding their needs and their understandings and working how we can to help empower them, right? So this idea of sort of, let's say, for instance, honesty, working on developing a distaste for dishonesty, yeah, this is quite good, but also working on patience and tolerance. Excellent. If we can do that, then even a little bit inspire, a little bit of tolerance, a bit more patience. It's fantastic. Gently, very gently. So this is pleasant speech, right? Using pleasant speech, in other words which are pleasant to them, right? We can understand what I'm talking about in terms of this. It is like what's pleasant to them is something that they can accommodate, that they find easy to accept, not something they find easy to reject. Something that they have any doubts for or they find easy to reject, they're not going to listen to it. So what we're saying is by using language, their own language, in a way within their own worldview, their own convictions, then there's like, oh yeah, of course, well, I agree with that. I've always thought that. And it's good, great. Let's talk about it a bit more, because it helps to reinforce these positive behaviors. So then is like saying, again, not just talking, but also actually engaging in the practice. So this is the third, which is working at the aim. So actually talking about saying, how could we change our lives, or how can we do this to actually become a better person, inspire this idea of saying, oh, I can do that. I can do this. Oh yeah, I'd like to be able to do that. So then I will do that, right? So this sort of idea, again, is to provide the opportunity of saying, you can see a way of being able to empower yourself. Why not empower yourself, right? This sort of becomes naturally. And again, trustworthiness depends upon seeing your model behavior, or our model behavior, I should say, not just you, me also, right? Our model behavior, how we behave, how we are able to do this is really deeply important for us to be able to do that in a way which is understood. And then they say, oh, Ben's not just, or whoever is not just saying this, they're actually doing it themselves. It's fantastic. It's amazing. So this sort of way of being able to say, okay, well, then he's not Christian or whatever happens. If it doesn't matter, look, he's doing very well. Well, he does, well, he's going to hell, but I still learned from him, It's like, okay, no problem. These sorts of things are like very, very good for us to do. So this is also essentially going to be some of the aspects where people develop friendships. Some are some will feel very, very close and can become very dependent. We need to be quite careful about moderating that dependency, because otherwise we can find ourselves slightly overwhelmed by it. And again, what we're trying to do is not have loads and loads and loads of friends or loads of dependents. What we're trying to do is to work on empowerment, self-empowerment, developing empowerment on their side, not becoming a source of dependency for lots of other people. So one of the aspects of this is to make sure that what we're doing is to empower them to stand on their feet, stand up for themselves and work together, rather than just becoming more and more dependent upon us. So one of the aspects of generosity is not to be too generous, not to be too attractive, but to get that balance right too. So he says, sorry, it says, why is so these four work together like this, basically. So he says, again, Rinpoche says we do have to be consistent in our behavior. We have to be consistent in our approach. Doesn't mean we have to be consistent to everybody. Everyone's different, but we need to be able to be consistent in terms of our practice, and being able to demonstrate that what we say is how we are. So then Rinpoche talks about how they function, right? Well, I've done quite a bit of talking on this, but essentially he says that generosity helps to bring a rapport, and generates a sort of sense of happiness, right? So pleasant speech, stuff that is easily understood and easily accepted, brings interest into, allows for an interest into, and a feeling of being well met, of being understood and empathized with. And again, it helps to dispel doubts. It helps to bring about convictions, and it helps to strengthen their own aims. So again, working at helping them with their aims, in other words, determined to keep their aims, improves their self-discipline, improves their understanding, and helps them to start practice rather than just listen to start practice. And again, consistency of behavior reinforces a sense of trust, and likewise demonstrates the ability, the fact that Dharma practice actually makes a substantial difference in our lives, right? When we see a sincere Dharma practitioner, it's very, very inspiring indeed. So in brief, there's from the Ornament of Mahayana Sutra, it says, but at first there's a rapport, secondly there's interest, thirdly there's practice, and fourthly there's training. So this is like why there's these four. So then Rinpoche goes into the elaborate explanation where he talks a lot about saying, for instance, the two types of pleasant speech. The first is where associated with understanding the person in terms of their worldview. And it's also it's in concordance with normal social behavior, such as smiling, being free of anger, being entertaining or entertained, listening, inquiring after health, saying, well, what do you think? So this, encouraging people to talk about themselves is a lot of people are very happy to talk about themselves. Never pushy, but much easier sometimes to live. Oh, they're interested in me, right? So this sort of mind here. And there's the other one is in terms of the second type of pleasant speech is in terms of teaching, in terms of Dharma, right? Dharma practice. And he says, we need what he doesn't say specifically here is that this is in accordance with our practice. But if we think about it in terms of meaningfulness, it's very hard for a speech to be pleasant in terms of the recipient if it's not done in accordance with their own determined practice. For somebody who doesn't have one, then it's good to consider the situation they're in. But certainly if they're asking, then it's okay. But what we want to do is to help people to make the determination on their own, rather than to tell them what to do. And again, he says, in terms of pleasant speech, he says, even with somebody who would want to harm us, we still should be trying to help, not help them harm us, but without any sense of thought in our heart, without any judgment or malice, right? It says, with those who are slow to understand or those who are dull, then we are willing to take the time to be tireless, to explain gently, not to hurry, not to be concerned this way. Those who were deceptive, who are looking for something else, who are just trying for a quick trick, or they don't really care about anything at all, then even still we should talk pleasantly without any anger, and be very, very clear, to be consistent in our message. So one of the aspects of those who are deceitful is deceitful people like to find deceit in others. Yeah, they're looking for deceit in others. Deceitful people will often see deceitful people much more clearly than non-deceitful people. They're sort of expecting it because they're deceitful. So if we're able to demonstrate that we're not deceitful, that there's no deceit in our minds or in our lives, that we're honest, naturally honest, then it's a little bit surprising, because they sort of imagine everybody's deceitful. They might then see us as an easy target, an easy mark to take stuff from. But we can be strong, we can be aware of deceitfulness without having to be deceitful, right? So we need to be able to be aware, be cautious, but we can still be honest. And so especially I think with deceitful or people, is to be strong, clear, consistent is very useful. Not judging, not malicious, just consistent. Yeah. He says, working on simple things is very good for people who've got little experience or they're non-trained. To working on generosity, ethical discipline, for those who are who are practitioners, who are rid of obscuration, they have a joyful frame of mind, then we can be a little bit more strict, a little bit harder on them in terms of saying, okay, well, but also on ourselves, right? So then we can also use this to discuss things that we need to discuss in terms of our understanding, or to reinforce, and to then talk about things like the Four Noble Truths and karma, and things that were really good for us to consider, or to reconsider, or to understand more clearly. And it says again, for those householders or monks who are careless, it's good to sort of to encourage them to become more conscientious. Again, we need to think about our place, how they see us, where we are to them. All of this is very important. We can't just assume some sort of domination, but also see, okay, well, maybe if I show a model on sort of carelessness, maybe they see how bad it looks like, right? So maybe I need to be careful not to just say, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's like, that doesn't work. We need to be able to be much more willing not to consider ourselves on a platform. Yeah. While we're proud, we are blind. When we really are, it's very hard for us to see what's going on around us when we've stuck ourselves on a high platform. We're looking down at everybody. You're inferiors, right? It doesn't work. It's no good for us. We need to be able to let go of any pride at all. All our pride, all of it needs to be gone. And recognize everybody is valuable. Everybody's valuable. So everybody is valuable. And it's like, therefore, how can I help you? Not in terms of you need to do this, but what can I see that might help? Hmm? I don't know. Maybe I'm being sort of going over this too often, but for me, I think it's very important to remember these aspect of fairness and honesty and openness and being able to meet people at their own level. There's this aspect in terms of the bodhicitta development that we're doing, which is this impartiality, right? Completely impartial, regardless of the object of our loving kindness. Every single being, without exception, and therefore, for us to consider ourselves to be superior would be like, we're not being impartial. And for us to consider that person is more important than that person, we're not being impartial. We need to understand how they see each other, how they think about themselves, where they think they are. And often there are people who feel very superior. So we can treat them as being superior because we're working with pleasant speech. We're working to meet their needs according to their views or whatever. That's okay. On our side, it's like, okay, I love you still. I love you still. I love you still. It doesn't make any difference. I will meet you whatever you need. Like you have a child and they're sitting on their toy throne and they're like, you need to do this. And you're like, yes, yes, of course I'll do this, because it's like, it is your child, right? So again, it's like maybe a little bit of just remembering our sense of love is very important. Our wishing to help, to cherish, to consider like they're our mother, or we're their child, or they're our child. So all of this familial relationship helps us to be a little bit less hard. So again, he says this idea primarily is to help bringing people to their aims, is to help them, the immature people, to become more trained, and the untrained to help them beginning to think about training their minds. Likewise, both in terms of the aims of this life, so especially for children and so on, it's not so useful to start sort of saying the first thing we need to learn is how to look after ourselves. Yeah, how to be able to consider that at some point or another, those people that we're dependent upon are likely to become dependent upon us, but certainly will no longer be available for us to be dependent upon them. So our first requirement in our world is for us to demonstrate our adulthood by being able to stand alone, so, not independent necessarily, but being able to look after ourselves and our own needs. And that starts with some very basic things like being able to dress ourselves, being able to brush our teeth, knowing, how to use a toilet, all of these things, eating properly. So very, very gradually we begin to learn, I can actually make this myself. I can do this myself. I can start thinking about getting an income. I can start thinking about finding somewhere to live. I'm not depending upon anybody. These are very, very important aspects of developing a sense of responsibility just for ourselves. Then a little bit more is maybe a bit more responsibility towards our family, those people that depend upon recognizing that our family might still need some strength and support from us. So then we're thinking, okay, what can I do for that? Then our community and so on. This all helps, right? So when we think, okay, then the community, just maybe a small amount or a little bit, or what we're able to do, and then those people in need, those people like in the hospices who are lonely or miserable because they're dying, they have no idea what they're doing. If I were able to help them, there's fantastic enabling to be beginning to think about taking more responsibility. Then thinking about at work, being a manager or a senior manager or whatever, helping to look after and to respect and to provide a great working environment for people. Absolutely relevant. These sorts of things are a deeply important part of us developing a sense of responsibility. You know, if we're sort of saying, oh, I'm shouldering the responsibility of all sentient beings, and yet I'm not able to sort of brush my teeth, then it's like, okay, well, you got the ideal's nice, the aspiration is fantastic, but maybe work on your teeth first. So this sort of aspect of thinking about responsibility and being responsible is very, very important. We all have our weaknesses, okay? We're all learning, but at the same time, it's to think, in terms of ourselves and trying to generate a little bit of humility. It's like, if we puff ourselves up thinking I'm master bodhisattva, then okay, well, how many people are you actually able to be responsible for right now? And then your aspiration to be responsible for all beings. Okay. So remember, practice, of course, is about developing ourselves. So our aspiration is to benefit all beings. First thing I must do is to learn how to practice that, how to be responsible for those immediately around me, myself, and then I can begin to start thinking about developing the engaged practice of being a bodhisattva. He says, when working at aims, if we should do this even when it's very difficult. Until we understand, until we understand the nature of the people that we're working with, through listening, through this generosity of listening, through being able to think about their needs, it's very, very challenging. We've got to work on letting go of our convictions, our sense of validity, our understanding of Dharma. We not to let it go from us in terms of our practice. It's key, it's core for us, but not to allow that to interfere with the views and the worldviews of others, and see how best can I meet their needs and their level in their world, in their world. There's an alien world I'm going to, right? So when I go to an alien world, then I need to be able to be good diplomat, not just say, oh, you need to do what I do, right? So we have to think, okay, it's like saying, actually really very similar. We sort of imagine that everybody thinks exactly the same way or has the same beliefs as ourselves. We know some people are sort of different in one way or another, politically or whatever, in their views. But in fact, in some senses, they are completely alien from us. They might appear to be similar, but often they're very, very different indeed. And it's like we mustn't just think that our way is the right way. It's not true. It's just our way. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's fine. But at the same time, for us to expect them to agree with everything we say is crazy. So it's our job to work on the diplomacy, not their job. That's true with our family as much as strangers or anybody else. And he says again, we should really work on our consistency of behavior, especially, he says, he sort of says, we really, really want to avoid making mistakes, certainly mistakes that are worse than those who we're associating with, but even we should be trying to hold ourselves higher, as high as we can. And as I said previously, we make mistakes, but then also to work on actually not just demonstrating it in terms of modeling it empty, a hollow sort of, this is how you do it, folks, but actually doing it for real, right? So otherwise, hollow stuff's just a waste of time. It's just no value. I mean, it might be good if you're an actor, but in terms of substantial practice or being able to make a difference in the world, it doesn't mean anything. Very, very little. So then here, Rinpoche is saying here, my pause is because he's saying there are different ways in which this is presented, but generally the idea is that many, many texts, especially the Ornament of Mahayana Sutras, it goes into quite a lot of detail about these four practices, explains that there are sometimes there's emphasis based on material, sometimes on teaching, and it all depends upon the individuals that one's dealing with. And again, I think what I would say or express in terms of how it's been taught to me very much is one looks at the context of the situation and adjusts accordingly. We do the right thing at the right time in the right place with the right people. So what we do is we keep and we're developing our flexibility on our side, not being inflexible, not being rigid. Yeah. Where in terms of our discipline, in terms of our practice, we are strong. We are very, very strong. We have to sustain our strength. We have to sustain our self-discipline. But in terms of the other views, then we, the one who does the flexibility, we can't expect them to bend to us. We need to be the ones who are flexible. This is how we develop and show our spiritual maturity. Is strong confidence in our faith, understanding. Faith, remember, is experiential understanding. Then this is what gives us the leeway, the freedom to have some sort of flexibility, mental flexibility. So he says, in general, then, since the whole text here, this book, and primarily, is that although the bodhisattva deeds, the deeds of a bodhisattva are limitless and will go on for many, many, many years and change many, many beings, a countless number of beings, the 6 perfections and the 4 means of being, which are our internal practice, and the 4 means of interaction, which is to work with others. These are essentially a fantastic summary of that sort of encircles or contains the practices of a bodhisattva. And he says, if we think about it this way, he says, we have 2 tasks. As a bodhisattva, we have 2 tasks. One is the maturation of our minds in order to develop the collections of causes that lead to our Buddhahood, right? And the secondly is the maturation of the minds of all other beings, so that they can do that, and so that they can become Buddhas. And he says, therefore, we have the bodhisattva levels, saying that the perfections bring to complete maturation the qualities, the Buddha qualities that we are developing for ourselves. And the 4 means of interaction bring all living beings to complete maturation. In sum, therefore, we can assume that these 2, we can know that these 2 are the active expression of a bodhisattva's activities. So then Rinpoche talks a little bit about how these are engaged in our practice. And he says we start off when we begin to understand the meaning of these, and we are able to be in a position to develop the aspiration to become a bodhisattva. We take the bodhicitta and then the bodhisattva vow, and then we develop an understanding of insight, of emptiness. Then in this sense we should really be we enter onto the path of accumulation, the first of the 5 paths to Buddhahood. When we develop our he says we do this both in session, in meditation, but also outside of meditation, so in both cases. When we develop meditative stabilization, serenity, or shinne, which is going to be the next volume, first part of the next volume, then we come to a point where our serenity and our insight become very, very powerful, and start cutting through our delusions, our afflictions. Then we enter into a path of preparation, when we actually have this yogic moment, this is called a yogic direct perceiver, where we have direct, powerful identification of the nature of reality, then at that point we enter into the path of insight. And he says things like joyous perseverance is present in meditation and out of meditation, even in these levels. He says, whereas only certain aspects of patience and so on happen while we're actually in meditation at that point. And generosity and self-discipline are latent, but they're not aspect. They're not actually necessarily present while we're in this very, very refined state of mind. So I think it's a bit technical. I don't necessarily know whether or not I can share with this with great amount of conviction, because it's above my pay grade. So maybe one of the things I like was Geshe Damshla saying to me when I asked about this question, he used to say to me, find out for yourself. So I think that's very good advice. I mean, Rinpoche is going to give us some very clear ideas about how these work, and rather than necessarily just accepting them, I sort of feel in many ways what we need to do is to find out for ourselves, not because I want to diminish or detract from our practice in any way at all. Maybe it gives us some insight into how this what these practices look like. But I think, first of all, what I need to do before I can really speak very clearly about this and say, oh yeah, Rinpoche's got this correct, is to have at least a strong sense of meditative equipoise. And then it's much easier to be able to talk about this. So I know my limits here, right? He said, once we've taken the Bodhisattva vow, then essentially, it's our job. We've given ourselves the job of engaging in the Bodhisattva deeds. He said, but when we're maybe we haven't taken the vow and we're listening to this, we can still be inspired by this. And there's still reason enough for us to think, well, okay, I aspire towards this. I love what I'm hearing. It's amazing. So I will just naturally do what I can to practice it. It says, don't feel if we don't have the vows that these practices aren't available to us. Of course they are. Once we've taken the vows, it's our job, right? And so that's what the vows are there for. That's our job. That's our job to do. Our job is the 6 perfections and these four means of engaging. If we haven't taken it, then but we want to follow the Mahayana path, this is how we do it. Okay, so it's simple. And so eventually we'll come to an opportunity to take the vows, and we'll find it very easy. It's fantastic. Much better to do it that way, rather than to take the vow and then find out what we've taken and what we have to do, because it's like, oh, we need to do all this now. And it's like, oh, I don't know how to do that. So in general, this is now the end of the text. And we've covered the entirety of the second volume, which is to do with the development of bodhicitta and the Mahayana path in general. So the last text, the volume 3, I'm not going to start now, is a very, very special and detailed presentation of the last of the 2 perfections. So this is serenity, developing this incredibly powerful and flexible mental stability, and also insight. So, and specifically, this is the wisdom that knows emptiness. So these 2 are the last 2 major sections of the Lam Rim Chenmo. So I could talk, I'm sure, for much longer, but I think I've talked enough for today. And so let's finish off by the traditional method of dedicating our merit. So this is the idea of saying whatever benefit there is from listening to this, or from teaching this, or from practicing this, even in this session, but in general, to set it, to say to myself, to ourselves, may it be put towards, may it be sealed to the purpose that I gave it in my motivation, to benefit all beings through the achievement or the development of our maturity, our spiritual maturity, that allows for us to tread the Bodhisattva path to achieve Buddhahood. Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so let's, until next session, when we're going to start on volume 3, let's consider our fortune in meditation.